Hello, fifth graders, and welcome back to another math show with Miss Condry. Today we're going to be talking about a type of measurement called volume, and we get to explore what volume is using these fun little cubes that I found at my house. So we're going to be talking about that and thinking about some strategies that will help you when you're completing this week's packet. Before we get started, I want to remind you that even though you're at home, you are still in a math classroom anytime you're doing math. So it's important to talk and behave like a mathematician. So remember to have a positive attitude, to be respectful to the people helping you, and keep on trying even when it gets challenging, especially when it gets challenging. And then always remember that word yet and how you might not know something yet, but the more you try and the more you persevere, the easier it becomes. All right, so today we're talking about volume. And you might remember we have some really fun tools in our classroom. They're called Omnifix cubes. And we've been using those. In fact, in September, if you remember during Number Corner, we put those Omnifix cubes together into a layer, and each day we collected a new layer of a rectangular prism. I forgot to bring home a bag of Omnifix cubes, so instead what I did is I'll just move my little camera here. I made my own little rectangular prism using these cubes that we have laying around the house for kids when they come over, or babies really. You might have some of these at home too, but this illustrates what volume is really nicely. So if I were to ask you how many cubes I put into this rectangular prism, you can figure it out even without having to take each one and count them. You could do that, but that would be kind of inefficient. But I think you probably could even look at this and predict how many cubes are on that bottom layer. And you could do that because you know how to find the area of an array. And really, we know that this layer is just an array. In fact, it's a 3 cube by 2 cube array. So if you know that, then you know that on the bottom layer, there are 6 cubes. 2 times 3 is 6, 2 rows of 3. Okay, so if there's 6 cubes on the bottom, on that bottom layer, and this is made up of 3 different layers, then you can figure out pretty easily what the volume, or how many cubes, are packed into this rectangular prism. So there's 6 on this layer, 6 on this layer, and 6 on this layer. So we could even count them like this, layer by layer. 6, another 6 would make 12, and another 6 would make 18. All right. So now we're going to look a little bit more closely at what volume is. I don't know if I actually showed you our learning target, but just so you know, believe it or not, we're looking for how to find the volume of a rectangular prism. So just keep that in mind as we're working today, and I think you'll find that this is actually pretty fun work. We talked earlier this year about how volume is when we figure out how many cubes are packed into a rectangular prism. Cubic units are what we use to measure that space. So here I drew a rectangular prism, and I want to introduce you to a few keywords. So this bottom layer here is called the base. I redrew the base down here so you could see the whole thing and know that there's cubes that are hidden behind it that you can't see in this picture up here. That's important. And this bottom layer has 2 dimensions that we need to know, and that is the length and the width. If you label this width and this length, that's okay too. Really, it just depends on the orientation of the rectangular prism, so don't worry too much about that. So if we know the length is 3 and the width is 2, then we can know that the base has 6 cubes in it. And then the other dimension that we need to know is the height. The height is like how many layers there are in the rectangular prism. So if there's 6 cubes on the base layer and then there's 3 layers, the height here is 3. All right, so we need to know length, width, and height to be able to find the volume. And one of the things that we found this year as we were playing around with volume and building different rectangular prisms with cubic units is that we could use two different formulas to quickly find the volume. And formulas are basically just equations that you can use every single time to find the volume, and it will always work. So the first one that we've talked about that you just saw was length times width times height. And when we do the length times the width, that gets us the area of the base. So another formula is if we just know the base has 6 cubes in it, all we'd have to do is take that 6 cubes and multiply it by the height. So here I have an example. So I drew a rectangular prism because a lot of times the rectangular prisms we're measuring do not have cubes packed into them or drawn on them. So you'll see some examples of rectangular prisms like fish tanks or terrariums in this week's packet. Just different types of animal cages even are a lot of times they're rectangular prisms, but they don't have cubes in them. But we can still measure them and figure out how long the length is, the width, and the height. So I drew a rectangular prism here. It has a length of 5 inches and a width of 2 inches. So I could use this top formula to say 5 times 2, the length times the width, and then multiply that by the height, which is 3. So I could know 5 times 2 is 10, and then times 3 is 30. And we label that cubic inches because it's labeled with inches here. And since it's inches times inches times inches, that's inches to the 3rd power, or cubic inches. So we write it like that. Okay. If I wanted to find the volume another way, I could also just know what the base is. And if the base, well, I know that's 10 because 5 times 2 is 10. So I could also just do 10 times 3, and that also equals 30 cubic inches. This label right here is really important because it tells us that you're measuring the volume. So this week, as you're working on finding the volume, make sure to use those two formulas and try and think back to the units that we've had and the times that we've been building rectangular prisms in class using those cubes, thinking about layers of the base. So each one of these, they're asking you to write the equation that you're using and then write the volume. Don't forget to label the dimension or label the units as cubic units. So either cubic feet or cubic centimeters or cubic inches. And I think you're gonna do great. I'm gonna do one more video that you can watch after this one that's gonna talk through some strategies for multiplying. All right, good luck everyone.